Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Abduction stories? I know there have likely been hundreds of these threads already, and it might be a tired topic, but I wanted to know what /x/ could make of my account. All that I remember about the timing is that it was at nighttime. There was no moisture in the air or on the ground, and I was 5 years old. We lived in Portland in a house about the size of a standard garage with a very large backyard. I got up in the middle of the night. I don't remember why, but I did, and I went directly outside. I saw the craft. I don't remember what happened next, but I feel like I was taken inside of it. The last thing I remember is being outside of the craft. Whether that was after exiting the craft, or if I entered it at all, would be speculation on my part. I don't remember going back inside, and I don't remember waking up the next morning and going to school. It may have been during the summertime, which would account for why I don't remember going to school. Are there any tricks anyone has used to remember more, other than hypnosis? I've never told anybody about this, not even my parents.
Abduction signs. Ever had them? The prevailing opinion among ufologists seems to be that abduction is so common that almost every human being has been abducted at least once, and that whenever a UFO is spotted, it is either going to or coming from an abduction site. Considering the statistics on UFO sightings is 1 every 3 seconds, that's something. Signs include unexplained scars, strange subdermal objects almost like an implant, missing time, sleep paralysis, night terrors, white birds in the window at night, unwanted pregnancy that mysteriously disappears, UFO sightings, of course. I remember only 2 potential incidents myself, one of sleep paralysis. Back when I still lived with my parents, we had moved out to the middle of nowhere, near the coast. I was about to fall asleep when I blinked and noticed several minutes had passed on my alarm clock. Strange, I passed it off as me simply being so tired that I actually fell asleep for that time. Then later I woke up again to the feeling of being watched, a very distinct feeling of having multiple presences in the room with me. I tried to get up to look, but I felt like all of my bones were locked in place, like every joint had been bolted in place. I couldn't move a muscle no matter how hard I tried. Having dabbled a bit in energy manipulation, Psi Chi, whatever you want to call it, I mentally summoned up all my energy that I could muster and visualized it shining outward as bright as I could. Then I somehow managed to move my left little finger and the whole thing stopped. I could immediately move every bone again. The feeling of being watched disappeared, and I jumped up to look, but there was nothing. I know sleep paralysis is also often associated with hallucinations, so that's what I wrote it off as. But I can't help but wonder, the other incident. The other incident was even way before that. I'd fallen asleep on my floor in a very awkward position, with the window open. I woke up after a while feeling very cold because of that. And groggy, because sleeping on the floor isn't that great. And when I looked up, I saw a large white bird sitting in the window. It immediately took off when I looked at it, so I don't remember what exactly it looked like. This was pretty close to a lake where a lot of birds were hanging around all the time, so it could just have been a gull or something from there. But it felt almost dreamlike, and the fact that I can't clearly remember whether it was even real, let alone what it looks like, makes me wonder too. I fear probing that memory any closer while I'm alone.
Hey/X/, I just watched a documentary about alien abductions, and they said some shit about dreams, and it really weirded me out. I had these dreams when I was a child, and I still fear them and have terrible anxiety. I am now 20. The first one I was 4 or 5, and my mom had just told me to stay with the dog. It will protect me. And all my siblings were in the same room with me. It's about an hour later, and the dog gets up. I follow to the other room and lay down. And I honestly don't think I was asleep, but it's reassuring to think so. But as I was laying, I heard a clown laugh, and a sleeping bag came floating in, and I could see a dent in the middle where someone was sitting. Next thing I know, it's on top of me. And then I wake up in the morning. I still call it the Invisible Man, and my family still tells me to watch out for the Invisible Man. As a joke, this dream happened only once, but was the most terrifying. The second one only happened at my grandparents' house and happened countless times. I would be sleeping and the invisible man would come into the house and carry me outside, and then I would wake up. The third was also at my grandparents' house most of the time, and I would be in the back of my parents' car and would just barely be peeking out the window, and there were things that looked like people but had big dog heads and cat heads. I would say like 6 or 7, I think it was my family. The documentary said aliens put things in your head when you see them, sort of like programming you to see otherwise. And just made me think because recently I seen what I believed to be a UFO, and last year I woke up with a big black shadow in the corner of my bedroom, and it disappeared. When I was in 8th grade, me and my buddy had seen a very small white orb come flying past us fast as hell and disappeared in the cornfield, which I also just read this article about Foo Fighters, but I wanted to get your opinions on this because I believe in aliens, but not exactly alien abduction.
You've been abducted by aliens.
I had a dream. I saw a gray and it was terrifying. It was short, too. I was surprised at how short it was, but when I saw how short it was and how that confirmed all the stories I heard about them being as short as a child, the terror increased. These things are pure evil, 100% pure evil. It had a tiny smile, very sinister, like it was enjoying messing with me. It just stared at me at the foot of my bed, smiling that evil, tiny little smile. Seeing those eyes in person was the most terrifying part. Those huge black eyes are just so evil, I can't explain it. I had severe chest pain that woke me up from the dream. My chest still hurts 24 hours later. I googled gray alien sketches and this one immediately caught my eye. This is exactly what they look like. Anyone else have experiences with aliens in dreams?
I woke up one night laying on my side with one draped over me like he was trying to hold me down. I was really tired and I could barely move, but I managed to reach behind me and grab hold of his neck with my right hand, right about where the neck meets the shoulder. It was like I was exhausted and barely had any strength, so I just squeezed as hard as I could. I felt my fingers dig in. They're soft, like a Nerf ball, and I was surprised how far my fingers seemed to sink into it. The thing said to me, "You're squeezing your own neck," but not in an audible voice. It was like my own thoughts. I knew I wasn't squeezing my own neck, but it threw me for a loop just enough that I let go. That's when I noticed its arm hanging over me, and I grabbed it with my left hand and twisted it, like you're trying to break a tree branch off with one hand. His arm was grey and long and thin, just like you see in abductee drawings. It bent over 90 degrees like nothing, like it didn't even have bones in it, just rubbery cartilage maybe. The thing vanished right into thin air when I did that. I get the feeling, if they had no control over us, we just beat the mortal shit out of them like it was nothing. They're soft, they don't weigh more than about 50 pounds by my best guess. It felt like a kid on top of me weight-wise, and if he punched me in the face with no real bones in his arm, it wouldn't do any real damage. If you can break the spell like I did, they're in trouble, and they know it.
OP here. I do have this thing where if I get woken up suddenly, for example, by my wife changing her alarm sound, that scares me, and I feel a similar pain. So it might just be an anxiety-induced chest pain rather than something paranormal. Maybe the gray wasn't evil, but I'm just an anxious coward, and so it scared the shit out of me. But after I saw the gray, I had a second dream where I was back in my childhood home with my family. I told my family about the dream, and of course, they thought it was silly. Then my mother's face started turning half green, and morphing all half human, half alien-like. And the message I got was, "We made humans. They are our experiment. Even your mother, we made her."
I've had maybe a half dozen experiences with them over the last 10 years, or things I think are them. Maybe not all of them were. I get the feeling they don't actually take you anywhere. Everything that's ever happened to me, I'm in my own bed. Or within an instant, I'm back in my own bed. Like so fast there is no here and there and travel time between them. I don't know whether they manifest themselves here, maybe along with their entire laboratory, or as you suggest, it's all just in that other thing's mind. And somehow what they think becomes a real-ish event here in our realm, dimension or whatever.
Yes, you never psychically leave your bed, but you can be physically affected in some ways. For example, people can affect their own physiology during lucid dreams. Most other entities can just make you piss your pants or make you tired and not well rested. Either way, you will snap out of a dream back into your own body. There's a reason most alien encounters have telepathy or them blinking out of existence. Those are characteristic of a dream state.
I recently had a dream that has shaken me up a bit. It was a very short dream. The entire ordeal while I was dreaming only felt like about 30 seconds of time. The reason why I can say with such certainty that it felt like this time is because of how real it felt. I could hear all the ambient noise, my steps, everything. The dream began abruptly with me standing at the open doorway to my backyard at night, standing inside the house. At the time, it felt like I had just let my dog out, but I could not see him. As with most of my dreams, I simply never think to question why. They just happen. Suddenly, I hear a noise that is not dissimilar to the noise that plays in the background of the original Pac-Man game, kind of like a distorted siren. Suddenly, a very typical-looking flying saucer quickly appears above my patio, maybe 150 feet in the air, and about 20 feet out from where I'm standing. Since it was nighttime, I could only really see the outline of it, but it was a very stereotypical round metal disc with 4 lights on the bottom in a diamond shape. What I assumed to be a glowing solid yellow tractor beam began moving under the saucer, and 2 figures emerged out of the bottom onto my patio. Keep in mind that I only got a glimpse at these things for maybe a second. Since it was dark, I only saw their outlines. They were about half the size of a human and had massive solid yellow glowing eyes, no pupils. They quickly ran out and looked right at me. I finally snapped out of it and turned to run. I took 1 step, and then I was instantly frozen in place. I could feel myself trying to use my arms and legs. I was entirely frozen in position and completely helpless. The feeling I felt at that moment, that I was about to be killed or taken by some completely unknown creature and was rendered completely useless from an invisible force, has been stuck in my head for days. If you have any similar experiences, I'd love to hear them.
Where did you wake up?
I woke up in my bed. Everything was normal. I assumed that if I was abducted, my memory would have been wiped of the event, and that I should not have even remembered what happened here. That's why I suspect it was so short and abrupt.
Sounds a lot like my abduction experience. I wasn't asleep yet, but I was alone in the house just laying in bed when this bright blue-white light came through the window at the foot of my bed. I panicked and tried to move but found myself paralyzed. I struggled to roll over to my right towards the door and saw a 3.5 to 4 foot typical grey alien looking right at me over the edge of my bed. It had a scowl and deep wrinkles between where its eyebrows would have been. Wrinkled and evil, big black eyes. I immediately blacked out and woke up suddenly in my bed, shaken more than a normal dream. It definitely felt real.
There have been strange happenings around where I live, cattle mutilation, weird lights in the sky, and people disappearing more than usual. I normally don't think any of this alien shit is real, but I have seen the lights themselves. They were weird and orange and didn't look like planes. I assumed they were drones, but they were way too high up. I live together with my younger brother and my mom, who is sick and in bed all day. My brother works from home and stays with her. One day he just disappeared. He is young and stuck with a sick parent, so I assumed he just couldn't stomach it anymore and went away with a girl or something. But he came back, and he is different. He won't talk about why he finished, which makes me worry. At first I was worried he had issues with gambling or crime or something, but he is so changed. He is very off, unable to focus and always like daydreaming. He never used drugs, and I don't know what is happening. Could it be that he was abducted? If so, why? And another question. Why would aliens want to abduct a 20-something-year-old from rural countryside of the third world, who spend most of his time playing vidya? Like, what's their end goal if that was the case?
I do have one story which may or may not be an abduction. I was about 14 at the time and I was at home with my brothers. My parents went out with some friends that night and said they would probably be out late. It was on a Friday and I was playing Luigi's Mansion. It was almost midnight at that point. Little bro came in and was watching me. It started to storm outside, only enhancing the atmosphere of the game. Lightning was flashing through the window, but suddenly, rather than just flashing, it started to get brighter. The room was bright to the point I finally went over to the window and pulled the blinds up and looked out. When I looked outside, the sun was pouring in through the window. I turned around and my brother was just looking dumbstruck at the window. I looked at my clock and it read 8:30 a.m. I asked my brother if he saw what I saw and he nodded. I heard sounds downstairs, and when I went to investigate, I found my parents cooking breakfast. I went on about my day, but later on asked my brother what he saw, and he described the exact same thing. Not sure if it was an abduction or not, but there was about 8 hours of missing time that both of us witnessed.
I've been getting abducted for about 5 years on and off. I'll tell you about my first sort of scary experience. I was staying at a friend's house because he had been seeing 9-feet lizard men watching him through his bedroom windows, and I couldn't refuse an offer to get in on that level of paranormal action. He showed me his house, and how they had apparently busted in a couple of windows in his bedroom. I was pretty impressed by that, so he decides we should all sleep in the guest room. We're chilling in the guest room, getting ready for sleepy time, when he tells me that he believes they're aliens. Whatever, man. We go to sleep. I woke up in a sweat for probably the first time in my life. Lo and behold, one of those reptilian bastards has his hand on the window directly across from me. I sit up and look around the room to see who all is still asleep, which is everyone but me. The thing is still there with its hand on the window and an incredibly loud rumbling like the house was shaking. There's a light source above the house that seemed to be made entirely of floodlights. Shit is bright. I notice the windows are rippling like liquid. Then this thing takes his hand from the window, disappears, and everything stops, and we're back in silence. Also, everyone was sleeping in very odd positions, like they had just seen something terrifying but their eyes were closed.
This event involves my oldest daughter and the oldest daughter of a longtime family friend. My daughters and I drove from Brunswick, Georgia to Wellborn, Florida, which we did several times throughout the year, usually around Halloween so my daughters could celebrate with my friends' daughters. On this trip, we stayed up sitting near a bonfire in her yard, catching up with one another, eventually going inside to settle in for the night. It was October 30th, 2003. I checked on our two oldest daughters who had been watching TV late into the night. My oldest daughter and my friend's oldest daughter were sitting together in the family lazy boy recliner. When I went to check on them before bed and tell them not to stay up too late, I noticed that they both looked scared. I asked them what was wrong, and they said they swore that they just saw a scary-looking face with big dark eyes. I asked them to tell me more, and they began to cry. My oldest daughter stated that she felt that something was watching them. The living room window was behind the recliner. So she turned to look and said she saw a pale, whitish-gray face with big black eyes in the window, and that when she turned to look, it stayed only for a moment and then quickly backed away. So when I entered the living room to check on them, it had just happened and they were both scared. So I talked them into going to bed, reassuring them it was probably just their imagination and not to worry. Well, a little later, approximately an hour or so, I heard a sound on the roof, heard the girls crying and sounding scared. So I went into their room where my friend's oldest daughter had a bunk bed and my oldest daughter was on the top bunk. When I entered the room, they were both crying and scared again, claiming that they heard what sounded like tiny feet walking across the roof. I noticed that their pet was acting funny, nervous too. This friend has also shared stories with me that she and her family have been visited before, and that she feels she and her family have been abducted over the years. I was never sure, but was curious because I had my own experiences over the years. On another occasion, at another residential location that this same friend lived at prior, we, my daughters, her kids, and her boyfriend separate time with more witnesses, all witnessed a bluish glow coming from the woods in front of her house. Both locations are way out in the country away from the city, and heard sounds. I remember commenting on that first incident when we were outside how I loved the sounds of the owls. There sounded like 2 or 3, hooting back and forth to one another. That's all I remember during this particular incident. It seems that at some point I was able to convince the girls to go back to sleep, and we all did. This main incident only had 3 witnesses: myself, my oldest daughter, and my friend's oldest daughter.
Mine is basically this. Some friends and I spent a night observing strange lights cross the sky, all of us seeing UAP for the first time. The next day, my friends left, so I was alone. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever we had seen the night before was somehow still present. Went outside to smoke a cigarette and saw sunlight glint off a metal disc as it shot out of a cloud formation. Ran inside, grabbed my camera, and began taking picture after picture of the clouds. Most of them were obviously just pictures of clouds, but I got a few good ones, pic-related, enlarged to see the UFO. Had a distinct sense that they're here. Came to kneeling in the yard, about 75 feet from where I had been sitting and taking pictures. But I didn't have any sense of missing time or weirdness. I only realized that I had been gone for almost 2 hours. Months later, when I looked at the timestamps on the photo album later that afternoon, my friend came over and we were playing with his dog and discussing what we had seen the night before. He thought it was probably an experimental aircraft, whereas I was full-on convinced that it was aliens or whatever. Walked inside to take a piss. A glowing, opaque but non-solid green prism/cloud/apparition materializes, floats towards me as I furiously blink my eyes and look away and look back, trying to figure out whether I should check myself into the psych ward. When it comes within arm's reach, I touch it with my left forefinger. I feel a slight pinprick and a distinct physical sensation of electricity as it appears to suck itself into my finger. I go to the bathroom and, while contemplating the possibility of having lost my mind completely, realize that I have gained a small, about 3 to 4 millimeter, cut on my forefinger, identical to a paper cut. This cut takes over a month to heal and leaves a smooth scar which persists until now, 1 year later.
March 16, 1965, at approximately 6 p.m. Central Time. I was standing in our yard near the porch in front of our house near Williamsburg, Virginia, when I noticed a strange-looking craft about a half-mile away, approaching from slightly south of the east. Aircraft followed a regular route north and south, but virtually never flew east and west. This craft appeared to consist of 1 or more rectangular metal boxes stacked upon one another in the center, with smaller rectangular metal boxes abutting it on each side. It had no wings. That is the way it looked head-on as it flew towards me. The only sound it made was a gentle swishing sound, similar to that of grouse gliding through the air. When it got closer, I noticed that this craft appeared to be made of brushed stainless steel with a slightly reddish glint. The sun had not yet set. No lights, no moving parts, no emissions. It was about 2.5 times the size of an automobile. The front sloped downwards from the top, 2/3 of the way down to the bottom, similar to early 1990s Ford minivans. Glass extended from halfway up to within 1/8 of the way to the top. At the time, this craft did not appear to be saucer-shaped, because I was viewing it head-on with the play of light and a slightly rocking motion making it look like rectangular boxes pressed together and piled upon one another. I retained a distinct impression of its sharp, angular design, especially of the seam that separated the side from the front, with no attempt at softening its features, as if it were a prototype. My mother was at the clothesline about 200 feet away. 2 humanoid men dressed in white uniforms were standing inside the craft and were on the side nearest to me, about midway between the front and the back, in a narrow corridor that seemed to go all the way around the craft, behind which was a bulkhead that reached the roof so that you could not see all the way through to the other side. Their uniforms were like those worn by American military officers, plain white tunics without any insignia, and they were not wearing caps. I was left with the distinct impression of them resembling fine-featured Englishmen. The attention of one man who seemed to be operating controls at a console that was hidden from view beneath the level of the window was directed downwards, while the other man looked outside. The craft flew at an altitude of about 400 feet. The man looking out the window drew the other man's attention to my mother, who was hanging clothes at the clothesline. The craft came to a virtual stop as they gazed at her when one of the men spotted me watching them, reacted like he was startled, alerted the other man, and the craft sped off at high speed beyond a grove of trees and was soon out of sight. That this happened 2 days before the first spacewalk on March 18, 1965, enables me to establish the date. Footnotes. The aftermath. My mother was adamant that what she saw was a satellite passing overhead, and each attempt to convince her that this was not a satellite, because satellites traveled many miles above the Earth, proved futile. She also denied seeing men inside the craft. My sister demanded to know where we had been, as she had twice come outside looking for us, including checking the barn, to call us in for dinner, but that we had disappeared for about 20 minutes and were nowhere to be found, while I was adamant that I had been standing right in front of the house all that time. While I retained a distinct impression of this vehicle not being saucer-shaped, in retrospect it appears illogical that the two men should be positioned and steering the craft from the side and not at the front, unless it was saucer-shaped, and what appeared to be the side was actually the front that was now turned towards me. Due to the oblique angle at which surfaces were struck by sunlight, a disc made up of rectangular pieces of metal joined together would appear to be rectangles due to variation in surface with the slightest change in position. But if it was saucer-shaped, why was there a seam dividing the side from the front? What appeared to be the side joining the front at a right angle might be due to lighting, making the surfaces seem to be flat, as the front facing the sun was lit up brighter than the side that was facing me. My conclusion that might not be correct is that it was not saucer-shaped. I recently became aware when my hair was clipped down to the scalp that I have deep scars of unknown origin on top of fissures in my skull that form 2 5s flattened inverted V's on the side near the back of my head. It happened precisely as I described with no reason to make up a story, and for that matter, I do not wish anyone to know who I am. That was more than 50 years ago. When I tried to tell others what I had seen, I was met with disbelief and did not bring up the matter again until about a year ago. I did not think of the craft as extraterrestrial or as even a flying saucer. This was near the beginning of an era of new technology that included transistors and ventures into space. TVs still used tubes. As I stated, it appeared to be a prototype with no attempt made to soften its features, particularly the sharp angle between the vertical side and the horizontally sloping front. The part in my footnote about my sister saying that she had twice come out to call us in for dinner, but that we had gone somewhere for about 20 minutes, I simply dismissed due to a careless glance outside, as I was actually standing about 20 feet southwest of the door, even though she had been clear that she had looked all over for us, but we were nowhere to be found. I am not brave enough to undergo hypnosis, but it would be interesting if she did, if she had a memory of what happened during the missing time that was prevented from surfacing. That was my only experience with nothing unusual before or since that time. I will add this. During a medical examination for employment when I had completed university, it was discovered that I had a section missing, a cyst, in my right kidney. At that time, I could also feel a pea-sized pinch to the left of my heart that vanished a few years later. But I have no reason to believe that these have any connection to the event. About 2 decades ago, when I returned from the hospital, my broken jaw was wired together. A few days later, I experienced a loss of consciousness that was like going under, and asked my doctor if that was due to residual gas in my lungs. In the blink of an eye, the room was uncomfortably hot, and in the next instant, it was cold, and 8 hours later. I cannot recall the medical term the doctor used to describe the incident. Yet, strangely, I seem to think that this episode was not connected to the operation. Less than half a year ago, I had my barber clip my hair down to the scalp and was shocked when he held the mirror behind my head, and I saw for the first time 2 scar-covered fissures on the side near the back of my head that were previously hidden under the hair.
Be kid trying to sleep. Something knocks on the balcony door. Dad hears and rushes up the stairs, opens it and says, "Get the fuck away from them." Next day, Father erects an iron fence on the balcony and says so we won't fall from there. Next night, go to sleep and fall asleep like usual. Next morning, the fence is trashed. My father gets really upset, grabs my shoulders and asks me, "What did they do? Are you okay? Does this count?"
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.